I would like to welcome all of our guests today. We are so excited to have you here. We're really grateful that you could join us today. I'm like unmuting people here. Okay, I think that is everybody unmuted. So welcome to the FannibalFest SofaCon. And we just, we want to acknowledge that it is a difficult time for everyone right now. There are financial difficulties and health difficulties, and we're all struggling a little bit. And we thought, bring a little sunshine into the world, and how better to do that than to have our women of Hannibal here. And we could not be more excited. So thank you so much for coming.
Hello.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, this is exciting to be back together.
And there's nothing like an axe murder to cheer everybody up.
So. Absolutely.
I know.
One that we love.
Yes, it goes without saying.
Before we get started, is there anyone who would like to say anything? I always ask this of my students, so I guess I'm asking that.
Can I go to the bathroom?
No. All right, well, Loretta, did you?
No, I did.
No. I was just going to say, thank you for organizing. It's really awesome to, you guys gave me a reason to put on something other than sweatpants today.
Actually, well,
I'm wearing shoes for the first time.
So this is all the brainchild of Betsy Craig. So she is our FannibalFest guru and organizer.
Betsy, yes, we love Betsy. Betsy is amazing.
Yeah, it has been.
Betsy is amazing.
No, it's great to have everyone today. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I do this. I will try not to jump all over everyone. But I do want to get us kicked off then with what was a really terrific question, and this is for everyone. Which character from Hannibal do you identify with the most, and why?
Oh, do you want Martha?
Yes, Martha starts.
There should be a little hand button on the.
Or a feather.
Is somewhere, but
I know. It's under more. I think you can raise your hand if you click on more, but there's only 3 of us. We'll be polite. We won't.
You know each
We won't need a talking stick.
When I saw the question and I started to think back on the characters and the fact that we touched on so many characters of Thomas Harris's books, and not that I am Bedelia du Maurier, but I think I really touched in with her curiosity, and I'm not a manipulator. I'm curious, but I loved how it all came together with her relationship and her professional as well as personal relationship with Hannibal Lecter. So I think that was a character that I fell in love with immediately, and especially with Gillian in the role of that, and her coolly iciness as well as the attraction. I mean, there was a chemistry between those characters, and I kind of feel it as knowing the people, the actors behind the masks of the characters. You too get in that sense of working together, an intimate relationship with them, professional wise, and the curiosity wise, and together. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Who else would like to pick that one up?
Loretta?
It's so hard. I love the Bedelia answer. I would, I would say, I think that can I answer with multiple, like as a collection of characters, I'm going to say Team Sassy Science, only in that I appreciated the levity that they brought to the show, because I feel like it actually reflected what happened behind the scenes of the show, because I'm sure, as you all know, and you've seen the blooper reels and everything, we had such an amazing group of people, both in the cast and behind the scenes, the whole crew, all the producers, everybody was just really fun and brought such warmth and humor to that set every day. And I feel like Team Sassy Science was the representation of that on the show, if that makes sense.
Oh, it looks like we have a guest, a surprise guest.
Vincenzo.
We have
my
a
goodness,
special
so lovely to
friend.
see
Let
you.
me unmute you. There you go. We have a new friend.
Hey, Vincenzo.
Oh,
He's a surprise guest for our guests, for the people who are attending. They did not know he was coming, so.
That's terrific.
Vincenzo!
it's so great to see you.
I
We're-
missed you.
Nobody is aged. Jan, it's so great to see you.
Nobody
looks great.
Oh, it's the saddest thing you could have said.
Her voice looks awesome.
I know she has like her flower crown
Oh,
thing.
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, you're not. I'm looking at the kitchen, and that's if my jaw went a bit slack, it's because I'm looking at my kitchen, which is, like a mess. Let's just say it's a mess.
That's beautiful. I've seen it.
I'm taking
Well, we're
pictures.
answering the
That's such a good
question.
idea. I don't.
We're answering the question, which Hannibal character do you identify with the most and why? So we can also throw this out to Vincenzo.
I'll let you
Oh,
think about it. Shall
I
I?
realize
that's-
While you think
I
about
love
it,
that.
We're gonna let you think about it for a second while Janice tells us hers.
because I know that I don't have to say that I'm not a serial killer, and I would not murder my friends and eat them. But I have to say I do identify with Hannibal because I had to over the course of 3 seasons of shooting the show, because I had to think from Hannibal's viewpoint, because for the most part he was the one doing the cooking that I was making. So that's my answer, Hannibal, not because he's handsome and unreadable and fabulous, but just because, serious reasons.
Serious.
Serious.
So Vincenzo, you've had a second to think about this and you've decided.
Well, I don't want to be self-aggrandizing either.
Why not?
I relate
Never.
to Will. I relate to Will.
Oh, interesting.
How come?
Sometimes I felt like I was Bryan's Will. I was Bryan's Hannibal.
So
Let me put it that way.
That's great. Okay, well, there's another question we have a lot of questions, but there's one that is kind of near to my heart, and I didn't even write it, but it is, was there a specific target audience for the show? And this would probably go to Martha and Loretta.
Martha, do you want to take a stab?
Sure, it's boy, oh boy, going back how many years now, when NBC basically, Katie O'Connell, who was heading up Gaumont International Television, had worked at NBC prior. And so her connections there, when she talked about the show, they said, send it to us right away. They loved it, and they made the offer to take it off the table. So right away, it was kind of destined to us to be the audience of NBC. So that can be a whole other show to discuss what the audience of NBC at that time, so many years ago, and who the advertisers were and what the advertisers were putting their money behind. And so it was kind of it was a very enthusiastic, a very creative, wonderful team out of NBC, and they loved our show. But it was clear once it was broadcast that we were a bit missing the mark of what we were making the show for and what the actual audience of NBC was. I think the later life in the Amazon Prime Video, and whether it's gone to Netflix or been taken off of Netflix but put back on Amazon, I think the streaming audience and what has picked up from word of mouth and from the appreciation of what the show was and visiting what the show was again and again, you're our true audience. And you don't find that on network television.
Yeah. Did you want to add to that, Loretta?
I was just going to say, I think really to tack on to what Martha was saying, I think all of us were probably a bit surprised by who the audience encompassed, because I think it went far beyond anything any one of us could have expected. And the just you know, who knew there were going to be so many female fans shipping Hannibal and Will, and who like, I don't know, I don't think that was ever in the design, but there it is. It was sort of awesome, but it sort of took on its own life immediately. It was very cool.
Excellent. Well, this question is kind of related to that. And I think this one is pretty much for anyone. From cast to script to concept to visuals, everything about Hannibal has had a role in its achievement of cult status. What part has the production of the show played in this, in your opinion?
Who starts? I think Janice should start, because I think her food was so critical to this show.
Well, you know, that's interesting that you would say the food, but I think that we were everybody was trying so hard to bring everything they had to the table, and we were really feeding off each other. You know, I would look at the costume department and say, oh, plaid, you know, so I'd make a plaid. I didn't emboss a plaid pattern in the roast or something like that. Or I'd say, look at set deck and say, well, they're using bugs, so why wouldn't I use bugs? And like, excuse me, can I borrow some of your bugs? And it just, I think that the idea of it being so collaborative, like all film is collaborative, but I think with Hannibal, we really, really fed off each other a lot. All the different departments really looked to each other for inspiration and little ideas to springboard from, to extrapolate from.
We have a new friend.
Sean. No wonder the sound got so good all of a sudden.
That's Sean Armstrong. Where? Hi. Wait a minute.
How's everybody doing?
Sean.
Hey, Vincenzo, how's it going?
I'm great. How are you?
Great. Good.
You are? Oh, wow.
There you are.
I feel like we're hosting actually like just a sort of reunion party for you guys.
Almost, yeah.
It is. Well, what's so amazing is that I think, like, I haven't seen everybody together in a very long time. So I've seen everybody individually over the last couple of years. And, you know, Martha and I are fortunate enough to live in the same town. So we get to see each other every once in a while, actually in person. And I get to travel to Toronto every once in a while. So I get to see, you know, like every once in a while, but never all together.
Yeah. Well, that's great. It makes it really special. So I couldn't be more pleased. We were talking about the role of the production in sort of contributing to Hannibal's status as a cult sort of classic at this point. And Janice had just finished giving us her thoughts. So let us move on to someone else.
I want to hear from Sean.
Oh, okay. Well, it's funny because one of the things Janice mentioned that I think was really true was she talked about sort of how everybody felt like the bar was really raised quite a bit compared to what would normally go on in a network television show. And it was really apparent from the pilot that this was not going to be a regular production, that it was not going to work at the same level. And everybody rapidly had to get up to working at what would normally be like a high-end feature film level as far as the overall quality and look of the show and everything. From my department, I remember being told very early on from Bryan Fuller and from David Slade that they wanted to use as much of the production audio track recorded on location as possible. And that doesn't always happen. A lot of the times with most TV shows, they just bloop almost everything as a matter of course. They don't even bother trying. And, you know, that really paid off a lot. And I think that's one of the things when you look at that, the entire every season of the show, like it looked far better than almost anything else on TV. And it was just, everyone brought their A game. Everybody came in, you know, wanting to do their best possible work.
That's so true. You didn't want to be the, you know, the slacker on set. Like, what? That's all you got? You know?
Each episode informed what would follow. So it was always evolving. And the pressure on Bryan for every episode and every season and that evolution of you know, upping himself and upping the creativity, upping, you know, all souls to it. Yeah.
I know, I was going to say.
There was an element of anarchy. Oh, I'm sorry, Loretta, go ahead.
No, Vincenzo, go. Anarchy is much better.
Oh, I don't know. But I was odd. I was almost asking myself the same question just yesterday, because I think now you see, I had a limited experience. I came in late. I came in the second season, and I departed early in the third season. But I don't think you could ever consciously create something like Hannibal. Not that there wasn't absolute genius at work, and particularly in the case of how Bryan conceived the whole thing, that was the case. But I think there was a lot of wonderful accidents. Like, it was a fabulous disaster in some ways, because things would just fall off of the truck and land in this perfect way. It was like there were higher powers at work. And there was I also felt that, Bryan is Kubrickian in his aspirations and his perfectionism. So we all, as Sean said, we had a very high bar to reach. But at the same time, there was a kind of anything goes mentality. Like, it was never restrictive in its pursuit of perfectionism. And there was a kind of wildness to the whole thing, because pages would drop like the day before you would shoot them. And there was just some kind of crazy creative energy on that show that probably just about killed everybody in the process, but that pushed it to that very, very special place. And I don't think you could ever consciously create or recreate something like that.
Yeah, I think that is spot on. And I think, there was the great saying of necessity is the mother of invention. And I think there were a lot of challenges on that show from day one, just because you didn't know what it was going to be. And because it was on NBC at a certain time slot, it had to fit certain parameters. So how do you work in all of that creativity and uniqueness and still work on a network model? So you figured out ways to be, as from the writer's room all the way through to post and everything in between. People were being so inventive, and as everyone's saying, rising above to produce this weird, crazy alchemy show.
And I think, obviously, going back to what you're saying and what we initially with NBC, they being the premier network of having procedural shows. So I think there was a bit of a pressure on us to have week by week a procedural. The Bureau of, the FBI, have that be the Will Graham, be that whole dynamic again of going to visit the Hannibal Lecter and then solving cases. And yes, we started off a bit like that, but what did come out of the first, particularly then into the second one, was just the audacious killings and the topography of the show and the tableaus of these murders. That as well as, I think, and then going to what we were unique at, the first time I ever heard the word food porn, and I hear it all the time now, out of Bryan's lips. And that's what he challenged the show and Janice. And of course, Jose Andres was, I want this show to be food porn. And that also translated then into the photography of the show, into the fluidity of the show, the storytelling of the show. It of its sense, being a serial killer porn, in the nicest of
in the nicest way.
In the good sense of porn. I won't say that this is like manna to my I have an essay on Hannibal as not procedural, percolating little brain, but it is. That just makes me very happy to hear. We haven't asked Sean the most important question yet, because he came in, which is, which Hannibal character do you identify the most with and why?
Probably, oh man, that's tough.
Shall we give you a minute?
Probably, what was Aaron? Zeller. Probably Zeller.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just because I was sort of like, wait, what? And that's sort of, I love working on the show, and I remember when Alo, the mixer I work for, and I got hired on the show about 4 months before we went to camera, and all we knew was it was a network series based on Hannibal, and it was going to take place in the period from when Will Graham meets Hannibal to when Will Graham finds out that Hannibal's a serial killer. And I'd seen the movies, I'd read all the books, and I thought, that's a really short window. How are they going to make that work? And the scripts would come out, and it would be like, I don't understand how he's not going to fit. Oh, that's clever. Okay. And it would just go on like that through the whole season. So it kind of felt like, you know, the crew was kind of discovering the shows as we went along. And Zeller, you know, is definitely the character who was sort of like, felt like kind of a little bit out of his depth and sort of not quite, you know, in the bizarre tone of the show. But yeah, that would be my pick, I think.
He makes a good audience stand-in in some ways. Yeah. Because all this weird stuff is going on.
and that was the other thing, because the with all the murder scenes that Martha was talking about, I got to be honest with you, when we were shooting, I don't know what Martha and Loretta and the rest of production did, because the whole first season when we shoot those things, the entire crew was going, well, this is never going to air. They're never going to put this on television, like on network television. There's no way on earth we're going to see any of this.
Standard
and pretty much all of it was on. Like
my wrap gift, when the show finally ended after the third season, my wrap gift to Martha and Bryan was I compiled a book of every single standards and practices memo that had come out.
That's fabulous.
It was a very, very funny read.
In the overall point, though, NBC just came back with just little trims. And do you have to really show all of it? So it wasn't so restrictive. It was quite amazing what we did get away with.
Yes. Absolutely. I wanted to ask, this is a question that came up a few years ago to Martha, or it's a topic that came up when Martha was talking at FannibalFest a couple of years ago. And since that was a limited audience, I wanted to raise it since somebody did. And that is, I know diversity and inclusion are a big part of Hannibal. Were any female directors considered for the show, past or future?
Always.
I thought this might be a good time to bring it up.
Yeah, I think it's something that we definitely talked about, right, Martha? And you know, it's an evolving journey in Hollywood. So I think it probably would have been easier to work that out now than it was even 5 or 6 years ago, when you're trying to get people approved and, you know, in the lineup.
How fast the world changes. You know, honestly, it was a difficult dialogue to have to get the support of, and two, the limitation of the number of female directors that had a resume, you know, that had, so it was, and Loretta's absolutely right. Had it, you know, been today or even last year, the year before, you have a mandate from studios for female directors, for, you know, equality and crew members and numbers. It was just that movement was not at that time. You know, we were just shy of that. But I think the whole thing of the explosion of social media, we did enter at the right point, helped to move along then the evolution of the support of female directors.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's great. I have a slightly less loaded or serious question, and that is, if any of you could have taken any of the props from the show once filming was complete, big or small, what do you wish you had taken? And in reality, what prop did you end up taking if you did? And that's for everyone.
Did Mass be a prop? No.
You can't take him.
He doesn't fall under the props category. The prop master was not in charge of him. I wanted Hannibal's entire office. I mean,
oh yeah,
that
I would have
just that set the drapes.
The stag.
The drapes, yeah.
I know.
The chair.
I actually didn't take much of. I don't think I have some Hannibal business cards, and I have some printouts of the Hannibal drawings that were hung that he had done. you know, because everything was up in Toronto, and it was like it wasn't like you could just pop over to the stage and sort of grab a cup or something. I don't know. Martha, what did you get?
What I got was the stag, and it was the plastic version of the stag.
Oh,
yes.
A very heavy one, but it was beautifully done. You couldn't even tell, but if you pick it up, it weighs 2 ounces. But, you know, I got the little type of props, you know, his pen, his letter opener, his book, his agenda, those type of things. But what was great, Gaumont took all the costumes, all the suits of Hannibal, and has put them in plexiglass cases and displays them in their offices. So those we could always visit and see. And then Carol Trussell, who was our producer on the show, she got the settee in his office.
Oh, that blue, I love that with the blue silk. Oh my God, with the show with that. I love that. Oh, I love that.
I would have loved that, but I don't know where I would have put it. It just doesn't match.
I know exactly. I would have burned this place down and put it wherever it wanted to be. I love that.
I know Bryan had the Eddie Izzard human, you know, torso shipped out to him, and it literally weighs a ton. It showed up in a giant crate.
I'm sure that foam is going to disintegrate any minute now.
It's hard to overstate how valuable a lot of that furniture was. Because normally when you, as a crew, when you come on the set and the art department set dressers have dressed it, there's usually one that's like, please don't sit on that, don't stain this, don't, you know, you got tool belts on, don't scuff anything, so on and so forth. And a lot of times we'd have a new set, and Bryan was very particular about a lot of the furniture pieces, and literally we'd stop everything, and the first AD or Julia, who was our on-set dresser, who's East German and not afraid to murder,
Fabulous.
would flat out just be like, that cost $80,000, don't sit on it.
Yeah, he was great.
Like,
yeah, Bryan designed some of that furniture, especially.
I heard,
Yeah.
Wow.
The office. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have anything that you wish you had taken?
Vincenzo, did you take something? Do you have that turducken thing? Yeah,
Well, I just remember taking home crates of oysters.
Oh, yeah. Those oyster cheese.
But I don't think I ever got a crop out of it now, sadly.
I do remember that reminds me, I think, yeah, the edible props were the best things to take. You couldn't keep them for long, but you know, if you were lucky and standing around at the right time in the right place, and Janice had extras of like the blood pudding in the orange.
Oh God, yes.
Oh God, like that kind of stuff.
Extra foie gras.
Somebody asked in chat, and since we're on this, since Martha had mentioned it, what furniture do you recall Bryan designing?
Oh, was
it
the stuff that Scott did? Well, Scott had his partner. Bryan's partner Scott is an interior designer, and had designed the chair that it was like a beautiful big upholstered chair with the legs were shaped molded like horse hooves, and it had straps over the like bridle straps over the arms and everything. That was one of Scott's pieces that had come out of that. It was very appropriate and cool. I can't remember.
There was a table, I think, from and it was for one scene in the Safe House in season 3 with Freddie Lowndes, and there was this really beautiful table that we brought up from LA.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that they did too.
Wow, that's great. We do have a kind of shippy sort of hanagram question here. Actually, we have several.
I should hope so.
And I have lost it. Where did it go? And this is mostly for Janice, but I think anybody could weigh in. If we were to have a season 4, and for some reason Hannibal and Will were, say, to become symbolically married, what would their wedding feast have looked like, do you think? What would you have made?
Oh my goodness, you couldn't fit it all on a screen. It just would be everything all the time. But I think that centerpiece, I'm sorry, animal lovers, would have to be a horse, a social worker in a horse with a lot of songbirds. That would be the main course, wouldn't it? Don't you think? Lots of pie, lots of raven pies and stag pies and just big, colorful, fabulous things with horns and dangerous things, bleeding things.
Sure.
Delicious things.
Anybody else have any other ideas? Like, that's not going to fly, but.
Who would be the wedding guests?
Who would be the wedding guests?
The other leg? No, I don't know. Bedelia's other leg? No.
Oh, we know Bedelia's still around.
No, Bedelia's the maitre d'. She's the house.
Who's the officiant? Yeah, who officiates at that wedding? That's what I want to know.
Price.
Price. I was going to say Price.
Bryan. I would have to. Yeah.
Oh my God.
So there's another, and of course, if we're talking about, the characters, we need to talk about the actors as well. We really need to talk about the actors. So we have a question that asks, will each of you tell us your favorite behind the scenes story of Hugh Dancy?
Well, I have a little, it's just a very quick favorite thing, of course, because my food is in it, right? And I'm sorry. But I had made some frog legs that I can't remember. Was that you, Vincenzo? Didn't want them in the shot. So I thought, well, I've got all these frog legs and they are delicious. So I fried them up. And just that time, Hugh, Mads ate a lot. A lot of people ate a lot. The DOP, gosh, why can't I remember the DOP's name?
Jim Hawkinson.
But Hugh was not quite as lustful a sampler of my fare. I don't know if he feared it or if he was just being discreet. You can't tell with the English. Anyway, I said, do you want to try these frog legs? He said, oh, frog legs, I've never tried them. I said, well, they're delicious. And so he took a little, oh, they are delicious. I said, well, have more. He said, well, don't you need them for the show? I said, you know what, take them all. I don't need them because they're not going in the scene. He said, oh, and he went and he took them onto set. We were shooting at the time. It was just in between takes. He said, you guys have to try this. And everything stopped so that everybody could eat frog's legs and make jokes about French food, Anyway.
As you do.
That's my story. The end.
For everyone. So
we were looking back at some photos, and in 2014, or is it 2015, we had Hugh had his last day on set, and there was somehow a knowledge that this might be the last shot, of Hugh.
I wonder if I can pull it up. I'm going to see if I can pull it up.
Mm-hmm. And Bob the grip, the head grip.
Bob DePrado, yeah.
Yes, what a great guy. He and his crew had organized a wrap party just for Hugh down in the cell, down in the dungeon, and had all the props being decorated. And he organized a food layout and some cocktails for Hugh, for, some of the crew to come down, because again, we were shooting all night. And it was so sweet to toast. To toast Hugh for all of his time and effort, and away from his family and with his family. He brought his family up to Toronto all 3 seasons, and he had a young baby boy. So it was very bittersweet to be part of that wrap party. Wasn't that sweet?
Yeah, that's lovely.
That's a beautiful.
Yeah, we shot till 3 a.m. And then that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that was at the end of the 2nd season.
Oh, that was season 2?
I think, yeah, because he was covered in blood. We were in the kitchen set, and he'd just been gutted by Hannibal.
Yes, that's true.
And Bob had been planning this.
No,
party.
He's not covered in blood, is he?
Well, no, but this is what happened, because we were shooting the scene, and then literally he's covered top of his head to his toes in fake blood, and we wrapped him, and he went around to try to hug people. Which didn't go well, but then he had to go get cleaned up, and then that's in your photo. That's sort of like he's completely changed, and I think Francois, our VFX person, had to literally hose him down to try to get all that off of him, because they fell into the blood on the floor of the kitchen, and they were just absolutely soaked.
Does anybody else have a story to share?
That was 2014. You're right, season 2. Yes.
Well, I just want to say, we know this, but not everyone who's listening to this probably has met Hugh Dancy, but he is a lovely human being. And there were times in the third season when we had some challenging moments, like extremely challenging moments. And there was, I don't want to air any dirty laundry. Everyone who's on this chat were the greatest defenders of me and the show, but there were other elements, shall we say, that were less charitable. And Hugh fought for me. Like, he was prepared to walk off the set in order to preserve the show. And that's the kind of guy he is. He has so much integrity, and I don't want to be corny about it, but it's true. Like, he's a lovely, it bears mentioning, he is a lovely human being.
We thrive on corny stories.
Yeah, and on that note too, Vincenzo, thanks for reminding us, because it was Hugh that introduced us to Maz and went to the mat for Maz, who was not a movie star at that time, you know, very little known.
Wow. I did not know
that.
Yeah.
It was, because they had worked together on a movie. Hold it up closer, Martha.
Aw.
Excellent.
Cooking lady.
5 years ago. 5 years ago.
Yeah, Hugh and Maz had worked on a film together, and that King Arthur project, and so they had become friends. And it was when Hugh suggested it, I think we all thought, like, oh my God, of course, that's brilliant. But most American audiences only knew him as Le Chiffre at that point, in the James Bond movie. And he was just about to win Best Actor at Cannes. So the rest of the world knew who he was. We were a little behind the times. So it just took a little convincing for everyone to see that vision. I can't imagine the show without him.
It's hard to imagine, isn't it?
I know.
Another.
Those guys are the most lovely. They were beloved.
Really, yeah.
That. Like, the crew, everybody loved them because they worked harder than anybody.
Yeah.
They truly had the hardest job on the set, and they were so much fun, and they were just regular guys. Like, there was no pretense whatsoever, and they were physically and mentally in a constant state of punishment. Like, they were constantly being punished. It was I think they're probably masochists. They loved it, but it was they really set a tone, and it was a very difficult show to shoot. So, you know, sometimes it's nice to hear that people you admire are actually lovely people. And
that entire cast was amazing. I mean, really, from top to bottom. I think about, like, Lawrence was amazing and so wonderful on set, and the whole Team Sassy Science group, Abigail, it's like every character was cast with the most amazing actors who were all so generous and fun, and Caroline, and just amazing people.
Laura too.
Yeah, Laura, like, we were so lucky.
Yeah.
No, as a crew, we were really spoiled because when you work, it's a very technical job. I mean, and particularly with the way that show was lit by Jim Hawkinson, with Bob DePrato as his key grip and Frank Tata as his gaffer. If an actor hits a mark on that set and they're a quarter inch forward, the shot's no good. And the three, like Lawrence, Hugh, and Maz were all just phenomenally technically gifted and were top of the bar every day, and they made things so much easier we wouldn't have got the show. We'd still be shooting if we had a lesser cast. We would never complete it. And that started the day one of principal photography of the show was in the field where they find the victim on the stag set, which that field is actually, if we turned around, you'd be looking at Will's farmhouse.
Oh yeah, okay.
But that was the very first thing we shot, and we had everybody but Mass in that scene, and everybody was locked in. Everybody knew what their character beats were, what they were doing, particularly Hugh, like, had it absolutely clocked in. I think the first shot with Maz was actually the first shot in the show, which is him eating dinner, which is one shot, which took, I think it was 20 some odd takes because the depth of field for the focus was so precise, but it was, everybody from the get-go was locked into what their character was and how things worked. And it just made everything so much easier. And they were all lovely to work with. Everybody was great.
Well, as Vincenzo said, it's always nice to hear that the people that you admire are actually decent folks. So those are lovely stories. Thank you. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and this is a question that came in on chat, and it's just so specific that I kind of wanted to throw it out there. As a kitchen appliance person, this person says, was it a studio deal to have GE appliances or a budget thing, and does Hannibal have a dishwasher?
I wish we would have had that participation. That could have helped. Yeah, I don't think we did.
Yeah,
No, I think that was a budget thing.
it was. He would have had, you know, handmade knives. He would have had everything
Right.
off the line. But I mean, we really watched the budget on that show.
Well, we have another question actually about that. Given the general budget of the episodes, what
5
was
cents.
5 cents? Okay, given your 5 cents, actually, I'm kind of butchering this question, but I'll run with it. Within that budget, what was the most difficult thing technically to pull off?
Visual effects, probably.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I think those are always a challenge, and it's always hard to plan exactly. You know, you want to make sure that you do them justice, and post always gets stuck holding the bag in production because everyone, it's like, oh, fix it in post, fix it in post, fix it in post, the old joke. And then when you have a show that you're trying to do on the schedule that we had, on the budget that we had, you know, not like it was a crazy, you wouldn't think of it as a crazy visual effects show, but man, it was jam-packed, really.
What, in terms of like outside of budgetary concerns, what was the most technically difficult thing that the show did?
I think Francois, and Francois' last name, can you help me remember?
Dejanay. The amazing prosthetic special effects guy.
Yes. And that was another department that, you know, because that was always up front in the script and in the planning stage of the shooting was always, how can we let Francois have enough money, the resources to be able to do what needs to be shockingly, visually, and meticulously done. And he did it for, I know he did it for a price, and he had to always cut his own corners to deliver to us. But he did a fantastic, he and his crew
He was brilliant. His work is amazing.
To give you a metric for this show, Hannibal's shooting schedule was 8 days. I've never shot a show for 8 days since.
Really?
And
No, he's right. Yeah, that's gone.
It's impossible in this era that we now currently exist in. 10 days is the minimum for any show of reasonable quality. Minimum. When I shot Westworld, it was 17 days.
Wow.
So I just want to give you like the miracle of what Sean did and what Martha and Loretta and Jan and everyone else involved did. It is doubled when you know how little they had to actually work with. And I don't know how the show accomplished what it. I don't know how I did it. Like I don't know. It just.
Well, no, because there was a scene in, I think, your third season episode where they're going through the catacombs in Rome. That set was about the size of a phone booth. It was literally like 2 corners. And you needed the guy who directed the movie Cube on an entirely 2-wall set to have everything worked out for that sequence to look like you were in this massive space. Because in lesser hands, that would have been unwatchable. It wouldn't have made any sense. So, I mean, you definitely,
that's amazing.
You definitely earned your paycheck on that.
Well, it is, yeah. I mean, by the way, maybe it wasn't 8 days at the end. Martha and Loretta corrected me because the schedule said 8 days.
Oh,
I don't know if it really
third
was.
unit. That was actually a big overrun that we that we bid off was the additional photography, the second and the third units, do all the pickup shots and all
Chris
those.
Byrne.
Yes. So it's true. We forget how quickly
Chris Byrne did a lot of heavy lifting on that show for sure. The second unit director.
Gorgeous.
All the food porn that was referenced earlier was Chris Byrne doing amazing, beautiful.
Yeah, the insert photography and
Anytime someone references a shot in one of my Hannibal episodes, it's been great. It's actually been directed by Chris Byrne. It's true. But the other genius and I think somewhat accidental aspect of this, what made Hannibal look so luscious for a reasonable price, was that as opposed to putting a lot of money into something big, money was put into something small. So small things were executed perfectly, and that was Chris's domain, and it made the show beautiful in the way that no other show, well, I think, has been since. And that really came from Chris. And I think Bryan and probably Martha and Loretta began to recognize what was there and then embellish what Chris would do, to the point by the time when we were doing American Gods, Chris was shooting as many days as the main unit.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
There's something about, Hollywood filmmaking tends to be, and I'm speaking really, really generally, but it tends to be very economical. And every shot has to advance the story, or, you hear this. And Hannibal has, it seems to me, an unusually high number of shots that are just there for the moment, for the beauty of it, for the breather, whatever. Was that something that was deliberate? Is that something that I'm making up in my head? What's your take on that?
That was, Bryan was always saying, and he said it multiple times in interviews and on panels and everything. It was like, we're making this like a pretentious art house film, right? So like lean into all of that breathing space, like let the scenes breathe, let the dialogue breathe, like live in the crazy red draped room and whatever it is. So definitely on purpose, I think.
If we had too much of something, you should double it.
What's that?
If we ever had are there too many flowers on this table? We'll get more.
Yeah.
And then you'll have the right amount.
I remember shooting a scene which was with Mads and Hugh, and I kept saying cut in the wrong place because I thought the scene was over. But they'd be like, "We're not done yet," because the pace, the actual. Sean is exactly right that a one-page scene would equal, traditionally, this is a very flexible rule, but traditionally in film, 1 page of script means 1 page of screen time. In Hannibal, 1 page of dialogue was 4 minutes. Was 4 times the average.
Well, explain why.
And it was the cadence, it was the language and the cadence. And there was, it had this dreamlike quality to it that was hypnotic. And to me, the thing that was most shocking about the show being on network television wasn't the violence that was permitted, although that was extraordinary. It was how incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? Esoteric the show was. Like, I couldn't believe that NBC could stand how esoteric the show was.
Well, everything felt like a chess match. Like,
it was
every
the beauty
conversation was so carefully plotted out. Like, nobody said anything off the cuff ever. No character ever. Everything was like their life depended on it. So they would pause and wait. And yes, it made for very long takes. I think the record was the scene where Crawford's wife comes to visit Hannibal and tells that she's going to commit suicide and she's taken all of her morphine. And she nods off and there's an act break. And then there's a commercial break. Then you come back and then Hannibal flips a coin and resuscitates her. We did that as 1 long take. And not only is it at that pace, she's nodding out from overdosing on morphine. So I think the take was like 16 minutes long. on the day.
God. That's amazing.
Now it gets cut and trimmed down to fit, but it's like that was what was required. That was sort of how that was the tone of the show.
Yeah.
But that was one of the things that was challenging about shooting it is, again, we had, very limited time, as one always does, but especially on this show. So every take, say you're doing like a 2-page scene. So that's 8 minutes per take if you're mastering the scene or doing, someone's coverage for the scene. So every take is 8 minutes. Say we generally run 3 to 4 takes. So it's like 24 minutes just to do one shot. It was very, very challenging.
And then going more to what you're saying, Vincenzo, yes, Bryan had a certain demand of directors. He hated the professional director going in and doing master and then coverage. So the mandate, to speak a little bit about how, it was never just a master and then going into close-ups. So do you recall the...
Oh. Yes. Well, that's not my...
We've never really discussed.
No, but thank you. That's such a wonderful question to ask. And I could, of course, go on ad nauseum. Truthfully, that's not, the master close-up is not my style. Not that I don't shoot masters, not that I don't do close-ups, but I storyboard everything. So everything is, in my brain anyway, cut before we shoot. And, but Bryan would push it further. Like what's wonderful about Bryan as a showrunner is that he is a perfectionist, but he's not dictatorial. Like he wants you to contribute something. And I think when he would get frustrated with directors would be when he felt like they weren't bringing their best to the table or they weren't being creative enough. Like usually as a creative person, people are always reining you in, like, oh, that's too crazy. You can't do that. That's so, the audience won't understand it. That people tend to be, especially studios, tend to be very, very nervous when it comes to, creative impulses of filmmakers. Bryan's the opposite. He's like, no, that's not crazy enough. And he would really push you to push the medium. And in relation to what Loretta was saying, like he would always say, well, we're making an art house film. This is an art house film. So he wanted it to go like the lesbian scene that I was
just going to ask you to talk about that because that was one of the genius fixes in all of broadcast television of all time.
Well,
tell the story.
Well, the famous Alana Margot lesbian scene that I was tasked with, Bryan said I wanted to be the most explicit thing you can imagine and like go as far as you possibly can. So I had to do some research, but knowing obviously this is for network television. And so I just came up with this notion of, well, they're two women, so it'll be like, and they're kind of mirrors of each other in a sense. And so we'll put mirrors in the room and we'll create this kaleidoscope effect where you will hopefully think you're seeing things that you're not actually seeing. And I think another kind of showrunner would have been afraid of that. They would have said, no, it's too much, like it's too, and then Bryan, of course, leaned into it. Like that is precisely what he wanted. And I felt like, I did my best work as a director on that show. And I think it was because of the people I was working with and because I was, more than anything, because I was being pushed to do the best work and encouraged and actually stimulated to do the best kind of work I could do.
Yeah, what a great work environment. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that scene, and just to clarify, that scene after our lovely broadcast standards and practices department saw it, gave Vincenzo a round of applause.
Wow.
Because they couldn't believe that somebody actually figured out a way to shoot a lesbian sex scene for NBC broadcast television.
That's terrific.
But
my husband likes to say that, oh, go ahead.
I don't want to dominate the conversation, but the other thing you should know about both Martha and Loretta is that, there are different kinds of producers. These are two highly creative producers who have tremendous taste. And present company excluded, but in terms of people that work with the material. No, but like when I was I don't live in Los Angeles anymore. When I did, Martha's one of the only producers that would meet with me. Because she was, well, that's not entirely true, but she was the only one who would one of the only ones who had good projects. Like, she was always developing interesting material. It was always really cool stuff. And by and large, what's that?
We can still do 14.
I guess. Bring it on. I'm available. But I mean, Martha to me was always like one of the. I knew Martha before Hannibal because I had projects that she had been interested in, we had talked about, and things that she had, and that's something you should know about these producers. Like, they have extremely sophisticated taste, to their detriment probably in this industry.
Well, I have speaking of taste, that was really bad. But I have a question first. Sorry. I have a question first for Janice, and then one that's ancillary to that for everyone. For Janice, it's what's the fanciest, most Hannibal approved edible thing you can make with the most limited ingredients?
Okay. Well, you do have neighbors? Or can neighbors be an ingredient? No. Okay.
No.
This is legal stuff. Okay, so I would say that it would. I think sanguinaccio. I can't remember how it's pronounced anymore. Sanguinaccio dolce is.
I'm looking this up.
Is probably one of the most exquisite things you can make with just, blood, cream, chocolate, blood. Sugar.
So as long as you've got one person there to sort of do the bloodletting, and a little bit of chocolate, then you're good.
Yeah, and it's rich, it's deep, it's gorgeous, it's luscious, and it's packed full of protein. It's good for you.
And these days, in these days of home confinement, I know here in Los Angeles, and I'm sure in a lot of other places around, a lot of the really good restaurants are selling provisions. They've sort of turned into general stores. So I bet you could go out there and find someone to sell you some blood to make, to add to your kitchen supplies.
Like you do.
No, there are lots of cultural cuisines that use blood in, blood sausage is a very common. So any sausage maker that has a big stash of, because you can freeze it, right? You need all this information, right? They're burning up precious.
I don't know. Somebody in Iowa.
Giving an instruction how to freeze blood, but never mind.
No, I think this is important because I'm watching the scrolling conversation, and someone in Iowa was just posting, not in Iowa, but I bet even in Iowa,
there is somebody making blood sausage.
Yeah, somebody's making blood sausage.
Yeah.
Certainly
the abattoirs collect it because they sell it for various things like, cigarette filters and things like that. So it's always around.
That's more than I ever needed to know about cigarette filters. For the rest of you, related to that, have you ever tried to prepare anything that was in Janice's cookbook? Or conversely, is there anything that you got a taste of on set that you thought, oh my God, this is amazing?
Yeah, pretty much all of it.
All
of it was delicious.
Sample a lot. And remember the sushi episode, which was
all that hamachi. Oh my God!
Oh, you brought in that great sushi chef.
Yeah. Yes, next time we have to. Yeah, more sushi.
I have 2 copies of Janice's cookbook. I've got one that sits on the pristine shelf, never to be touched, that she has signed, and then I've got the one that's actually in the kitchen with the cookbooks that I don't mind spilling things on.
Have you used it?
Yes.
Oh, look, we have a new friend.
Who's that in the corner?
No. Hello.
Oh,
hello.
Coming in. Who's coming in?
And the chat goes
Bryan Fuller. He's right on my Brady Bunch screen. He's right below you, Martha.
Wow. Yes. Bryan.
Hey, Bryan.
Hold on. Let me unmute you here. There you go. Now you may talk.
Oh, how fabulous to see you.
It's so nice to see you too.
Oh, my
I
goodness.
should be eating savory treats while looking
I
at it.
feel like, well, I'm just gonna break down and cry now.
How is
Before you come
everybody?
in, you have to answer a question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yes,
you have to
step into
answer
the
the
question
question, what Hannibal character do you identify with the most and why? That's your entry.
Bedelia du Maurier is probably the character that I identify with most. A, because who doesn't want to be Gillian Anderson? And B, she's really savvy, but also she's a risk taker, and she's driven by knowing more about the human species, both professionally and I think in some way spiritually. I think she's fascinated with humanity. So that's partly why I wanted to become a writer.
Excellent.
What was everybody else's answers?
Yeah, I'll let you all talk amongst yourselves for a bit.
Martha said
also had
Bedelia also.
Bedelia.
Yeah, for similar reasons, you know, and I loved that how you wrote it, how she interacted with Hannibal. I mean, that to me is the deepest relationship in the show. I know we have Will,
that she's smarter than Hannibal.
Yes.
But she still lets him eat her leg. I don't know.
Just the one.
Just the one. That's not.
Did everybody order their Red Dragon Con hats?
Wow, that's
very nice.
Yours.
Fish
Excellent.
Yeah.
I think that's Evelyn.
You and Swag.
I know I'm getting her name wrong. Well, we have another question for everyone. So this is, why do you think, and this is actually a PhD student who is working on a dissertation on iterations of Hannibal Lecter. So this is for posterity, science, if you will. Why do you think that Hannibal Lecter has remained popular and had so many reincarnations?
Martha, you've been with them longest.
Yeah, no, I think, and we've always said this, that everyone always likes the boogeyman. And for what Hannibal Lecter has always done is he, you know, eats the rude, as Bryan coined in the very beginning, eat the rude. So it's kind of, you know, the rude get their comeuppance in a very, very talented and an intellectual way. He is smarter than everybody else.
It's very satisfying.
I think he makes us question right and wrong. I think that's why we're fascinated by him, because we want to know, don't we, why we are drawn to those bad children.
What do you think, Bryan?
Yeah, I'll go back to something that Maz said the very first time that we met to talk about this character. And he really saw him as the devil, and a way, the gentleman devil that was so enraptured by humanity, he fell in love with its most intriguing example. And so I think the devil's been around a long time, and the devil's been around to teach us morality lessons. And so there is a certain kind of morality and ethics with Hannibal. He's a good doctor. He does take his profession seriously, but he is a seductor and a tempter, and I think that's fascinating for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have thoughts?
Vincenzo?
He looks good in a suit.
That really is what it all comes down to.
Well, he's kind of, you know, now I'll take the slightly less sophisticated approach. I mean, I think he's a cannibal James Bond.
Yeah.
And I think the...
You just sold that pitch.
Yes, I mean, James Bond is effectively a serial killer. We don't think of him that way.
Yeah.
So Hannibal is, you know, maybe he just happens to eat the people that he has a license to kill. He has a license to eat them.
License to snack.
License to snack.
He's just not wasteful. That's all it is. He's being very resourceful, and you know, it's head, tail to snout, whatever, you know, eating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Door to
But
door.
I've always, can I interject? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
I feel like I'm talking constantly.
No.
That's kind of the point of this, so it's good.
Well, I don't think this is the case in every iteration of Hannibal, but I think the two most successful versions of Hannibal are Silence of the Lambs, the movie, and then the Hannibal series. And at the core of both of them is a relationship where you have a teacher and a student, but the teacher is, as Bryan said, the devil. And I think it's that relationship. It's not just Hannibal. Like Hannibal unto himself is kind of boring, but it's the relationship between those two parties that makes it so captivating and interesting, whether it's Clarice Starling or Will Graham. And that is, and to me, that's the genius of the Hannibal series is obviously it's the relationship, the romance in a way between these two. So it's you know, it's the two of them.
Yeah. We have a question for Bryan, but this also extends to everybody else in the context of the work you do. The question itself is, any tips for beginner writers? And to sort of open this up to everybody else, any tips for getting into what it is that you do for young people looking for work? I don't know that.
Well, writing specifically for the screen, I think it really helps if you're taking it very seriously and you want to be a writer to move to one of the metropolitan areas where writers are being most sought, whether it's New York or Los Angeles. And I think the next thing to do is to read a lot of scripts. It used to be that people would recommend that you write a spec script on an existing show. And that's kind of, I was never really a fan of that because I want to work with writers who are demonstrating what they would do with their ideas as opposed to what they think I want them to do with my ideas. And that's a clearer way to express yourself. I think, you know, for young writers, I think write is the most important thing. Read scripts if you want to be a screenwriter. Read the kind of things, the scripts for the shows that you love. Watch your television with the closed captions on so you can get used to seeing words on a page and dialogue represented graphically so you can build up that muscle in translating it to your own page. And then I think there's a certain amount of networking, and Loretta, who is producing, I mean, what would be your recommendations for people, Loretta and Martha, about how do you like writers to come to you?
I mean, I think everything you were saying is absolutely correct. I'm always amazed by writers who, even those who have been working for a while, who don't have anything original to share. Like so it's hard to know what their voice is, or, you know, get to know them as a writer if you don't have a script to share in your own voice. And I think the networking thing is so important. Like volunteer, go, you know, a lot of the people that I know that are working in this business, I know through film school, and everyone's sort of come up together, and because they all helped each other as students and have all sort of helped prop each other up as they've gone on to do other things. And that was from volunteering on someone else's set for some, you know, no budget short film that they did 10 years ago or whatever it is. And those kinds of things, I think you just want to build up your network as much as possible. You know, whenever we're all allowed out of our quarantines, you know, go volunteer to be a PA, go whatever it is, whatever experience hands-on you can get just to meet people, ask people to read your stuff and get notes back on it. And then whenever it comes to me, as Bryan was saying, I like everything. I like genre, I like period pieces, I like everything as long as it's good and interesting and has really cool characters that I can get into. it is all about your unique voice, I think, ultimately. And it's a really hard business to get into. Like, you've all heard it before, you know. But it's, as Vincenzo was saying about Martha earlier, there, you know, here's this amazing producer who took a meeting with this amazing new voice because she saw in him something, you know, he went out on a limb, made really cool independent projects so that someone like Martha can set a meeting with him and get to know him and help champion somebody, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, well said, both of you. And just to add, I agree with everything you've both said. It's true, and we're always looking for a new voice. We're always looking for that fresh, a fresh take, but that's pretty broad. But, you know, as Bryan said, right, you know, it's true. We need to read a lot of samples of what you've done, and indeed so much work still needs to be done on it. But there's always, it's what is your uniqueness? What is your asset that you're bringing to any project? And
do you know how you you know how you find a unique writer, Martha?
How?
You sneak up on them.
You sneak up on them. So cute.
That's quarantine humor, I think. That's
very sweet.
There was oh well.
I want to hear. Actually, I want to hear Vincenzo talk about.
Yeah.
Because he's sort of representing a whole different take. I mean, as someone who is now producing as well and has written and directed, and I'm sure gets asked this question a lot.
I don't know if I have anything to contribute that you guys haven't already said. I mean, I never thought of myself as a writer, and I stumble when I say that. I don't feel like I deserve that moniker, but I did write, due to my lack of success as a filmmaker, I wrote a lot. Like because there's nothing else for me to do. And I'll say this, I got much better at it. So I think it's about writing as much as you can. We always learn, you know, I once had the great honor of spending time with Terry Gilliam. I made a documentary on one of his films. And he said, you know, when I draw, I don't know what I'm going to draw. I just draw a line, and then that gives me an idea to go somewhere else with it and somewhere else. And I think the greatest fear that people have with writing is the blank page. And so what we must always overcome is writing that first word or that first sentence. And then once you do that, that leads you somewhere else, and it leads you somewhere else after that and after that. And it's just continually being in that process, and that's how you write. It's as simple as, I mean, that's how you grow as a writer. Then there are people who just have a gift, and you know, that I'll never have. But I think it's really about nose to grindstone.
I sit at my desk every day to write, and there are days where I don't write, and I'm just sitting there staring at the page, going like, the Thomas Harris quote on writing is the most relatable thing to me, which is you have to show up every day and hope that the characters show up. And if they do, I hope that somebody else shows up that gets to go on the page. And so I show up every day, and there are days where nobody shows up and I feel like an asshole. And there are days where the right amount of people show up and I get them on the page.
And the one thing I'll add to that.
Were you sneezing?
Maybe.
Sound.
Are you okay?
We'll go again. Sorry.
Oh no! Do you have that? You should put your mask on.
I'm well isolated and safe. Hopefully, everyone else is too.
It's really nice in your face.
Language is a virus. The one thing I want to add to what Bryan said, just because I'm seeing the poster behind him of The Shining. The best book I've ever read on writing is Stephen King's book on writing, and I feel like on writing.
It's a great book. It's so good.
Stephen King on writing.
Somebody asked about my mug.
Yeah.
But everything first of all, it's one of the most entertaining books you'll ever read, oddly enough. But everything you need to know is contained within that book.
I think I have.
All right, that's great. That's really great. I wanted to, we're coming up, I don't know if we're coming up on time or not. I don't know what time we are. I'm
Yes,
looking at the
10
clock.
minutes. Oh, we've got 10 minutes.
Got 10 minutes. So what I'd like to do is ask everyone what your favorite episode of the show is and why.
Oh,
Make it good.
that's too hard.
No, it's not. Pick one that you just think this was it. For whatever reason, it could be behind the scenes stuff, in front of the screen, you know, on the screen stuff.
Well, I like the finale of the first season. That last scene where he's walking, you know, after he's butchered everybody and he's walking through the rain. I just thought that it was just brilliant. I just loved it.
In Mizumono? Yeah.
Season 2.
It is beautiful. Season 2, yeah.
Oh, was it season 2? Oh.
Was that season 1?
Was that season 1?
Season 2.
Season 1, he was walking
And
down.
it's when Will is in
corridor.
jail and
Yeah.
he's walking down the
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that was goosebumps.
Janice was drunk that's okay. It's all right.
Sleeping so hard I couldn't see.
Crying too hard, right. I mean, what is not to cry about?
Yeah.
No, it's a beautiful moment. You know, people say, oh, I'm supposed to ask right now, where do you imagine Hannibal and Will right now before we continue?
Cuba.
This is an important question. Cuba.
Listen to the man who knows. Cuba.
All right, he's still in Cuba.
Oh, Bryan.
But we have all that fan art for that, so that's
Oh
good.
my God, it's so great.
Still in Cuba. Good to know. So other favorite episodes?
Sean, you're on the stage. You have a unique perspective.
You know what? I will always think very fondly of the pilot. There were a lot of interesting moments in that. And like I said, it was very rapidly apparent to the crew that this was not going to be the usual TV show. The scene where Will and Mass have breakfast in the motel, that whole scene is shot in an actual motel room. And as we were setting up, we're looking towards that window, and the blackout curtains are closed. There's just this little slit. All of the light in that room, and we blacked out the back door of the motel room, is coming through that shaft of that gap. And that whole scene is shot in profile, except for Hannibal's last 2 lines that were a close-up. That's like forcing the edit. We didn't shoot it any other way. And that almost never happens in television. You never commit that heavily to something, and that was something we did all the time. That was also when we did the scene in the bathroom, which looks strangely familiar, the FBI bathroom, with Mass and Hugh and Jack. When we did the master, take 1 actually, I think. I was on a ladder booming over the top of the set. And as we were slating the camera, I felt a tug on my pant leg. It was Lawrence. And he looked up at me and he went, "I'm going to be loud." and
so
that's
he
this,
was.
through all the rehearsals, when that other guy walks in and he just goes, "Use the ladies' room." He said it like that, except for that one take where he roared. And I could see everyone at the monitors jump a foot in the air because he is loud. And that is what's in the show. He only did it that one take on the master. And that's what's in the edit. And I think there's some, like, that to me is why it's always my favorite, because it really set the journey that we were going on for 3 seasons.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. I know.
And I love that line too, where Hugh says, "I don't find you that interesting." And Matt says, "Oh, you will."
Yeah.
I love that.
We actually, as part of FannibalFest, the convention, we've been able to go to the motel where that was shot. The interior shot was shot, and that is a really special little motel. People are looking at us like,
special, all
why
right.
why are there like 50, mostly girls getting out of this bus to go look at this motel room? So yeah. What else? I know people have favorites.
I love the opening of season 3. I mean, I have many loves on the show, but I love the I love that it was a Hannibal Bedelia story. I loved that it sort of said, like, it left everything everything that was hanging in the air, you had to still wait to see how it was falling, an entire episode, which felt fun to me. And I loved the kinky subversive dynamic between Jillian and Maz, and, you know, is it that kind of party? And, you know, he cares a lot about how I taste. And like those that were, and I think Vincenzo directed it beautifully. And so for me, I love the temperature change of the entire series that became like this, like we just kicked the pretension into high gear and had a ball.
And it should be pointed out that the opening of that episode was directed by Chris Byrne.
Yeah, he went to like for a dime. He went to Paris with the helmet, which I had, and the wardrobe, and guerrilla filmed that like over 2 days.
Unbelievable.
And right after a terrorist attack, so the roads were all locked down, and the terrorists were getting away on a motorcycle with a black helmet. So I could pull over and question.
Oh my God.
And Bryan, you missed earlier in the conversation when Vincenzo said that whenever he gets complimented on a scene from one of his Hannibal episodes, it's always something that Chris Byrne actually shot.
Chris Byrne saved us in so many ways. We were like, we shot the first 3 episodes back to back, which was a huge mistake of season 3 because it just overtaxed the entire company and poor Vincenzo. But I think they turned out really well. And, you know, I would be curious after everybody responds about episodes of just scene, like what's the scene that pops in your head?
Can I speak to that? And also, one of my favorite episodes is what's it called?
Are you looking it up?
I did. Konomono. When Mason Verger eats his face.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, doesn't that have to be like one of the greatest scenes of all time? Period. In anything.
It's pretty fun when he's feeding it to the dog.
Those are always the most fun to shoot. The gore scenes are always hilarious. They're always a lot of fun to shoot.
Oh my God.
It's one of the most horrific and funny things I've ever seen.
Yay!
Now we have people quoting, "I'm full of myself."
Right. I love watching the stream.
Yeah, the stream is pretty good, actually. People are just going off on all kinds of tangents. It's wonderful. Well, we are almost at time, so I just wanted to open it up if anybody has anything else to say. And actually, I do have one other question. I'm sorry. I do. And I have lost it once again. Do you remember and this is for everybody, do you remember the first time you met Fannibals in real life? Tell us about it.
In real life.
I met them at a Hannibal dinner. I met them for the first I didn't know there were Fannibals, and I had a Hannibal dinner, and it was just small in a bookshop. I had it in a little bookshop, so there were only enough. There's only enough room for like 12 of us seating. I thought, well, you know, 12 that'll do it. There might only be 12 viewers in the city, and we had to put it on 2 evenings. And they brought me presents and drawing, you know, sketches, artwork. I couldn't believe it. Poetry, books. And yeah, I was so surprised. They knew everything about the show. It was amazing. And then just grew from there.
Yeah.
I know, was it a Comic-Con? When did we first, like, when? It was Comic-Con.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Where we all paid for ourselves to go down to be there, right? And it was explosive. It was amazing.
It was amazing. Oh my God, that was amazing.
What I found really interesting about the cross-section of Fannibals, which I count myself as one because I love this character and I love many incarnations of him, and I think Martha has done a wonderful job in shepherding this fantastic, iconic character. It was really just it was so easy to chat with folks, not just about Hannibal, but about pop culture and about things that we all watch. And it was a really interesting reminder of the medicinal quality of entertainment, and how we're all driven toward the medium of storytelling and in its many varied ways, because it's healing in some ways, it's soothing, and sometimes that is a placebo that's just, you know, distracting us enough from the shit that's weighing us down in a way that I understood my passion for science fiction storytelling and horror storytelling when I met a lot of the Fannibals, because I was like, oh, we're all driven to this because we were escaping something else. And this was the safe place. Like, Hannibal's a safe place for all of us in some ways, because we're not thinking about our own problems and our own traumas. We get to revel in the traumas and problems of characters who find themselves on his plate. And I think it's a wonderful thing that our brains do that allow us to feel good as a community, sharing an experience of storytelling.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Well put. Well put.
Anybody want to add to that at all, or are we good?
I just would like to say how amazing it is that everyone has maintained that enthusiasm. I mean, it is, I say this all the time in work, and just because I hear, when people find out that I worked on Hannibal, there's an immediate gushing. Oh my God, I love that show so much. I can't believe, like, oh my God, you were so lucky to get to work on it. And I do feel so lucky to have worked with all of these amazing people and everyone we've been talking about, but also so lucky. Like, that was the first time I'd ever seen a fandom like up close and personal. And that just intensely in love with the show that has maintained itself. Like, I see you all on Twitter like every day, talking to each other, having conversations. Like, the family, the global family that has been formed is so remarkable to me. It's really spectacular.
You know, I've had very little experience with this myself, except with Hannibal and the Fannibals, and I had the good fortune to go to a convention in Toronto.
Oh, you should know that we've had a lot of comments about how you and Michael Dougherty's live, rewatch of the episodes was like far and away one of the best things that happened at the last FannibalFest.
Well, you guys are so sweet.
It was very cool.
Well, that's nice. That's so sweet. But the thing about the Hannibals is how warm that's precisely it. They are such a warm, inviting group. And it broke my heart when they organized a global screening of my film in the tall grass. Like, that wouldn't happen anywhere else. I don't believe anyone else would have done it. It was like a viewing party. It meant a huge amount to me. I think it says a lot about the kinds of people that are involved, and then also we know they're all very twisted and sick too, which makes it
well, yeah, but it's okay to be weird, so we know that.
Fine to be weird.
Yeah,
I read it.
Fly that free flag.
Well, we're at time, and I just want to thank you all for coming, both our announced guest and our surprise guest. It has been so wonderful having you here, and we just, especially right now, I think I've seen more than one comment go by where people are like, this has made, COVID-19 and the quarantine and everything so much better for me. So just thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules for this.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been great.
Thank you for organizing.
Everyone be safe, be safe. Be like Will and wear your masks.
Yeah.
Wear your masks.
Somebody needs to make one to sell. We gotta have this. We have to have a Hannibal mask. I think when I end this, we're all going to go away. So everybody say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Great seeing
Thank you,
everybody.
Thanks very much.
Good to see everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.